I don't think fasting is difficult, but going without water when you're singing and speaking is interesting. I want to amplify a little some of what I shared with you last night, and maybe some of what I shared with you at different times in the services. But I want to begin with a story, and I'm going to tell you it's going to be an admission from the outset. It's a joke, a story that I told you 6 years ago. Now, I wish there was a rule that jokes could only be repeated every 6 years. It doesn't work that way. I think that's probably a good idea for many jokes. But also, if you think about it, we have a long, wise tradition of repeating stories. All this is a repetition of our story over and over again. So I take the liberty of sharing this with you again. If you were here 6 years ago, you'll laugh early. If not, hopefully you'll laugh nonetheless. There's a man who goes to his doctor and he says, "My wife, I think, is suffering hearing loss." And the doctor says there's a simple way to test this. He said, "Can you bring her to me?" He goes, "No, I don't think she recognizes she's suffering hearing loss." He said, "Okay." He said, "Do this at home. It's very simple." He said, "What I want you to do is I want you to stand behind her at a distance somewhere in the house." And he said, "Just say one simple phrase and just say it. And if she doesn't respond, take a step forward, say it again at the same volume, and then a step forward again at the same volume. You'll work out exactly where her hearing loss begins, where her hearing ends." The man says, "I got it. It's simple. I can do this." And he goes home, and that evening, his wife, he smells the food, smells from the kitchen. He goes into the kitchen. He sees her at the stove. He goes to the opposite end of the kitchen, and he says, "Sweetheart, what's for dinner?" No response. Takes a step forward. He says, "Sweetheart, what's for dinner?" No response. 3, 4, 5 times. He's standing right behind her. He can feel her body against his. He says, "Sweetheart, what's for dinner?" The same volume. She turns around. She says, "I've told you 5 times, meatloaf." Now the joke is retired for 6 years. Except when he shared at breakfast tonight. Well, we don't have meatloaf in our house. We stopped making meatloaf or anything with meat in it. But we do have a lot of what? And never mind. I don't know if it's the construction of our house. It certainly isn't our loss of hearing, but my wife and I are always saying, "Sweetheart, what? Never mind." One day we'll just text each other and be done. If you think about it, it's a great joke. Why do we laugh at good humor? And I think that's good humor because we recognize something about our own story. We recognize our own vulnerabilities in stories. That's what comedians do well. They find a point in life that we can connect with, and they do exactly that through humor. They punch into our hearts and pull us into the reality. And the story, I think, is not only funny, but I think there's some poignancy and some wisdom. Because some of the time when we think people aren't listening or can't hear, the truth is it's we who are not listening and no longer hear. It tends to be men. At least in my experience, growing up with men and women and in my household with a wife and daughter. It tends to be that my wife said, "I told you." And I said, "You did?" So maybe it's a different kind of hearing loss. It's a little deeper in the brain than the outer or the inner ear. But I think there's a difficulty that is encapsulated in the joke, the discomfort of this joke, and the discomfort sometimes of good, true humor, which is it touches on a nerve. And the nerve that it touches on is our own gradual vulnerability. It's difficult for us to say to ourselves the phrase, "I can no longer." That's powerful and sometimes painful. It's difficult to look at our parents, our aunts and uncles, our spouses, husbands, wives, and say, "He or she can no longer." That's a recognition of a reality that's challenging because we're recognizing a change in us, a deterioration, an inability, maybe even a disability, and ultimately a form of our own mortality. And if we can't talk about mortality on Yom Kippur, a day and a time in our lives dedicated to coming face to face in mortality, to wearing the shrouds that we will once wear, to not taking the next day for granted, to saying Unatane Tokef earlier and again, and saying what we're recognizing in that prayer, what we're forcing ourselves to read, is that some of us won't be here a year from now. That's what the prayer says. We have the pretty, beautiful, sanitized version in this prayer book. What the authors made the decision to take out of it was the challenging, gritty text that tells us all the ways that human beings come to the end of life. And many of you know what's missing on the text. You come to the page and see what is, but you also see in the blank space around the text the reality. And we learned during this period of pandemic, if not then, when did we learn our own human vulnerability? Why else keep 6 feet from another human being or wear a mask? Surely not for fashion. In our tradition, we have a great and deep recognition of human vulnerability, of life and of death. What do we say? We say in Deuteronomy, Uvacharta b'chaim, you shall choose life. And it doesn't say only when you're 12 or 16 or 24 or 18 or 50 in your prime. But there's a man who may be here, he may be watching now via live stream, but he came up afterwards. And Larry is turning 101 on Tuesday. He also is mandated by the Torah, as he does, to do one thing, which is to choose life, and also to listen to his wife when she says, don't climb stepladders anymore. So Larry, we all say, please don't climb stepladders anymore. But think about what it is in your life, at this point in your life, to choose life in this moment and in the next. What is it to pull away from life and out of life? What is it to have a flame, a pilot in you, and to make the decision if you're going to feed it with more fuel so the light shines brighter and can make warmth and light for other people? Or if we're going to allow that light, by virtue of age or decision, to become more dim. Uvacharta b'chaim. Every day we wake up with the mandate to choose life, and you shall choose life, God says, because after all, I gave it to you in this breath and this moment. Feel your heart, and if you're able to do that, you know that life is this precious, precious vessel, an extraordinary yet empty gift, something for you to utilize to make extraordinary and rich, not only to enrich yourself through your experiences, but to be that vessel that is overflowing, an outpouring of wisdom and wealth of goodness to the people in the world that so desperately need your wisdom and your wealth and your goodness. Every morning, the first words that I say before I move, or maybe when I move, a shoulder, a leg, a knee, something, I say to God words that I learned as a child. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shechzarta bi nishmoti bechem la'raba emunatecha. I say, I thank you, God, who, according to the Kabbalists, the mystics, the rabbis, restored my soul to me, an aspect of my being dislocated from my physicality and sleep, and then the fact that I'm awake and alive tells me that I'm reunited, that I'm in a state of shlemut again, that my soul is in integrity again. But listen to the second part of that extraordinary prayer. But imagine if every single day you start not with your aches and your pains and your needs, but with your heart, full as a well, to fill it with one particular thing first, which is gratitude. Modeh ani. But then listen to the challenge and the wisdom and the beauty, the lyricism of this second part of that same prayer. So after I thank God for making me, allowing me to get up presumably, and to do the things that I've chosen as tasks, as joys in my life in that day, even sometimes as burdens, I say a phrase that's so enigmatic that'll mean something different to every single one of us. Rabba emunatecha. Rabba emunatecha. Rabba means how great. Emuna is faith or belief. And the ending emunatecha means I'm saying to God, how great is your faith in me? That's the wisdom of Judaism. That's the beauty of a way of awakening. To realize that God made you alive in this moment because God has faith in you. Isn't that extraordinary? Don't we come to these places to somehow find faith in something invisible, but yet God every day is invisible, finding visible in us, saying, you whom I see, I'm whispering into you the idea that I'm giving you not only life, but faith to exist, faith to be and to do. So get out of bed. Don't waste this day to Netflix, to games on your phone, to trivialities and complaints about yesteryears and yesterdays. Look forward with intent. Realize that every plan that you have must have 2 Hebrew letters next to them. Be'ezrat Hashem, Beit and Hey. In the Hebrew, you might see an Orthodox text. We'll send you a note. It'll say, here's our plan, Be'ezrat Hashem. What does it mean? If God wills it. I'll see you next Thursday, if God wills it. I'll see you next year here, if God wills it. Unetane Tokef reminds us to take those words seriously. But ask yourself for a moment what it is to live life with vigor. Remember that Dylan Thomas poem. It starts, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should rave and burn against the dying of the light. Rage against the dying of the light. That's a beautiful way to live life. It isn't always serene, but it's powerful. I know so many of you at all the ages of your life are every day noticing the flame and tending to the flame and saying, as long as I have life, I have light, and I'm going to share that. As long as I have capacity, I'm going to use it. We've come to a period in life when I imagine that there were once shepherds walking in fields and they thought wasted time was looking at the stars, but we don't even make time to look at the stars unless it's movie stars. We live in an age where we're so distracted by these things and by those voices. And yet here is a wisdom tradition that says, stop as often as you can and notice the gift of being you. And imagine that every single day UPS or FedEx or just God places these gifts at your doorstep. Who would we be? What kind of me would I be if I didn't open it? Sometimes we think it's too much of a burden to have to open it. It takes time. It takes effort to live today well. But imagine from God's perspective when God says, what did you say when you awoke? I placed faith in you. I need you for something. At age 101, at 24, at 68, at 99, I need you for something. God saying, I need a partner, and that partner isn't humanity. It's you as an individual human being. Otherwise, why would you be here? Reb Nachman of Bratslav, that man who had a short, wise, but tortured struggle with his own soul, said, if my tomorrow isn't better than my today, what use have I of tomorrow? And imagine that God might be saying, if your last breath wasn't used fully, and if you don't intend to use the next one with purpose, why should I give you the gift, that cherished and precious gift of yet another and another and another? There's so many stories in our wisdom tradition that teach us about the different ages of our lives. And in the scrolls, the 4 scrolls that are in that ark, there isn't a single one that says life is over before it's over. That's a human choice. What does Abraham do? He does nothing until he gets old. Then he becomes really important. Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, uninteresting in what we in our society in our age would call the peak years of life, the CEO years of life, the virile years of life. They don't matter. What matters in the Torah is something that clearly has impact, which is experience and wisdom and soul formation. And then we discover a Sarah. And then we discover a Miriam. And then we come to realize who Devorah is, Dvorah, why she becomes a prophet. And then we understand that every one of us is perhaps a moment away from the greatest moment in our lives. We're not there yet. We haven't lived it yet, I guarantee. No matter what we did before we might have retired, whatever we did professionally or personally, having our children or not, imagine that the work of your life, the most extraordinary moments in your life are yet to come. If you're awake and alive, God says, I've delivered on my promise. You're here, there's a reason. In the Talmud, there's just a poetic, lyrical, beautiful phrase. It says that behind every single blade of grass is an angel whispering, grow, grow, grow. Imagine if God will give an angel to a blade of grass, the angels that God has placed around you to say, grow, grow, grow. Gmar Chatima Tova to all of you.